Okay, so welcome. Today's meditation is looking at a practice that's called sending and receiving, or Tonglen, in the Tibetan tradition, but with some bells and whistles. So it's really about developing our capacity to be in touch with suffering. So enjoy 3 sounds of the bell, and then we'll start. Listen, listen. This wonderful sound brings me back to my true home. So I start establishing my awareness. First, I am aware that I'm here, that I am experimenting with my awareness, with gradations of awareness, and with my mind's capacity of being with suffering and releasing my habits around suffering, gain and loss, pleasure and pain. I release tensions in my body and my mind. And I focus my awareness more clearly on my breathing. Breathing in, I am aware that I am breathing in. Breathing out, I am aware that I am breathing out. I follow my in-breath from its very beginning through all of its stages to its end, and as it transforms to an out-breath. I follow my out-breath from its inception at the end of the in-breath through all its stages, and as it disappears to become the next in-breath. I lightly touch my breath with my awareness, not manipulating the breath, but just observing it as it is. One might say that what I am manipulating is my awareness by guiding it back towards my breath. As I calm and release my body and my mind, I start to observe the many gradations, the many possibilities of awareness. At times, my awareness is lighter, and at times, it is heavier. There are times when my awareness might feel like it is caught in a thicker, even swampier environment. I might discover that I'm being weighted down by ideas, worries, plans, or any thoughts that are not moving but are sticking in the mind. I might notice that there is an accompanying feeling in the body, a somewhat heavier feeling, a pull down perhaps below the diaphragm. At other times, I notice that I have become perhaps more spaced out. Thoughts may be clearly present, but they feel non-substantial, very light, very spacey. I cannot quite grasp what the thought was. This is often quite pleasant. In the body, it often feels more spacey and manifests as a floating in the head between and behind the eyes. I observe these changes in awareness and in the body, and I play with them. As I am aware of this interplay of swampy and spacey states, and gently bring myself to the middle. In the body, it may be expressed as coming back to the chest or the abdomen, to a light expansion of the chest, a small lift and opening of the sternum, and a widening in the back of the chest between the shoulder blades, while the throat and lower ribs remain relaxed. I can shift the quality of my awareness by changing my body. I can play with releasing the back of my head, tucking the chin ever so slightly. I can release the lower ribs through greater awareness and hollowing of the space between my sits bones and of my lower abdomen. I just notice how changes in the body create changes in the awareness, lighter or heavier kind of awareness. Starting Tonglen, taking and sending. I look at a situation of suffering. It can be my own suffering, the suffering of a loved one, the suffering of a society or of a place, or the suffering of the planet. Try and look at the suffering very clearly, in very clear details. I breathe in the suffering. The breathing is through my whole body, not just through my nose or lungs. I take in the suffering. I visualize the suffering as thick black smoke entering all the pores of my body, coming into my heart. In the heart, the smoke transforms, and I breathe out through my whole body, sending white or blue healing light to the suffering person or situation. I breathe in the black smoke of suffering. I breathe out white or blue light of healing. I keep breathing in and out. At times, I may not be breathing in the black smoke or sending out the light. Then I come back to it. Sometimes I may need a break from the smoke and the light. So I come back to it as I'm able to. I notice different fluctuations in taking in suffering and sending out the light. At times, there will be a swampier, heavier feeling, as if being weighted down by the pain or trying to avoid the pain. Other times, I might feel quite spacey. I keep bringing myself to the center while maintaining the taking in of suffering, opening to suffering, and sending out healing, holding on to nothing, keeping nothing except the openness of my heart. At times, the suffering is no longer clear. I have lost awareness of the original situation. This also can manifest as floatiness or heaviness in the mind and in the body. At times, I might be tempted to switch the situation and do the Tonglen with another situation of suffering. The exercise is to keep the awareness of suffering, being in touch with the suffering, and maintaining a spacious heart, and just noting the interplay between them, how they affect each other, the suffering and maintaining the space within my heart. I reestablish my openness to suffering. At this point, if you wish to change the situation you're working with, feel free to do so. You can change the particulars, the narrative, the situation. Visualizing the situation clearly. It can be my own suffering. It can be the suffering of a loved one. It can be the suffering of a species or a forest or a people. It is the suffering that naturally makes my heart bleed. And I experiment with taking in the black smoke and sending out healing light as a practice that is purely centered around my establishing the space of my heart of my mind, taking in what I do not want to touch, releasing out, giving away with nothing, no holding on to anything, taking in suffering, sending out healing. Practicing the same thing, taking and sending, taking in the black smoke of suffering, sending out white or blue healing light to the suffering. But now, doing it as a meta practice, as a practice of love, aimed at alleviating the suffering of another. The aim is simply my intent. So I'm doing the same exact exercise, but whereas the intent previously was to keep the space open in my heart, now I am intending mentally to relieve suffering, to send love. The focus is no longer on me. Just taking a note of the difference, if any, of doing the practice of breathing in the black smoke and sending out white light, doing it with the intention of relieving suffering, of sending love, versus doing it as a training to keep my heart open, to allow myself to touch suffering, to not run away from suffering. And now, doing the same practice, Tonglen, taking in and sending out as the natural movement of the in and out breath, as the vibration of my heart, of my being, of all of life. No longer training the mind to endure or to open, and with no agenda to dissolve suffering or any other aim. There is no taker, there is no sender, there is no receiver, just the movement of life, in and out, dark smoke and brilliant, bright light. So take your time to massage any part of the body that you might need. And just noting one's reactions. These exercises are meant to so-called sharpen our ability to notice what's happening in the mind. And then as we take on the practice of sending and receiving, it originally is meant to train us in touching suffering without pulling away. So developing our equanimity. Because normally we don't want to touch suffering. So we take in what we don't want. And we give out what we want to perhaps keep. Even though we don't necessarily want to keep white light. But it's generally we have a tendency to want to keep things to ourselves or within ourselves. and not take in what is not pleasant. So the practice is to be able to take in what is not pleasant and give away what is pleasant. And we again notice fluctuations within that there is no one way to do it. There are many ways and many subtleties to one's ability to do it at different times. So just observing that and coming back to as much of a natural movement of oneself or of the universe with it. Would anybody has anything to share or comment or question or whatever? We can do that before we end. Yes, Betsy.
So if you're taking in the suffering.
Sorry, you're coming across very muffled. Let me see if I can. Go ahead. Can you say that again?
So if you're taking in all this suffering, is that better?
Yes, I can hear you much better now. It was actually my my volume.
Oh, okay. When I see suffering,
Mm-hmm.
and it stirs pain inside me.
Yes.
And if you're taking in all this suffering, what are you doing with all the sadness and pain that you're taking in?
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. That's, yeah. What you're doing with it, you're opening your heart and you're literally flipping it over. You're turning into white or blue healing light. So you are actually doing something with it. The training is to, over time, because the natural reaction is either to, well, they're both reactions are very similar. I say, I don't want to touch the suffering. And often the reason is exactly because of what you're saying. It's too much. It makes me, it congests me. It brings too much pain. So the thing is, I breathe in this black smoke and I recognize, look, this is just the black smoke of my own mind. It's not like you were in the fires in California breathing black smoke, right? So you recognize that and you recognize I'm training myself to keep my heart open. I know that my reaction is, oh, it's too much. I can't bear this. Why are they suffering so much? This isn't fair. This isn't right. And I love them so much. There's so many stories. So you leave this story, even though you're seeing the suffering very clearly, the story of the suffering, and you're leaving the stories that you're weaving around it, not that they're wrong, but you're leaving them away. You're just looking at the suffering as it is and opening to it. It's an experiment because my natural reaction, which says, I don't want to touch it, tends really not to work. Because the next time I see suffering, I still don't want to, I can't touch it. And there's no way I can escape pain. There is pain all around us. So this is an experiment that we do with ourselves to try a different method, to try, I have a habit and the habit says, don't touch because you'll get very, very unhappy. So I do that in a controlled way in my meditation. I open up to the suffering and I'm giving myself a way to work like a venting option for the suffering. I am doing something, sending out this light, and then you keep taking in the smoke and sending out the light until the suffering which is in your mind right now, anyway, because you're doing it in your mind, the situation of the suffering dissolves. The white light dissolves the suffering. But the training itself is to be able to open up and take in what scares me, what I do not like, what is too much for me. And really the heart can always hold more. There's always more space in the heart. So when my heart congests because of pain and suffering, I'm training myself to create a larger container, to create more space, so that however strong the pain is, the space in my heart is larger. So the pain and the suffering cannot overtake me. But it's a training, because often we come with a history from ourselves, from our society, from our parents, from many generations. We've had this training of congesting with suffering, of locking onto suffering. This is trying to do the opposite. And then you recognize there are times when I can really open and times when I can't. There are times when I think I'm opening, but really I'm spacing out. You just play with a different, no, it's the nature of it. Because, hey, I came to meditate. I came for a pleasant experience. Now I'm taking on this unpleasant experience. I'm escaping it in whatever manner I can. The mind will do that. So I just observe all these things and play with them.
But the action that you're doing is turning that suffering into the white light, the healing.
Yes.
So you're doing something with it. You're not accumulating it.
You are definitely not accumulating it. You are just kind of there as a vehicle, and you can almost even take it in and let it pass through you. You don't have to take it in and send out in the same direction. You can just be there. I mean, that will be a different practice, granted, to some extent, but I'm standing in the midst of this black smoke and it just passes through me. That's a certain kind of exercise. In a way, the advantage of the Tonglen as it is I'm taking the suffering and acknowledging it and doing something with it and opening my heart, as opposed to just the other method, which will be I'm here, I'm allowing the suffering to come in and keep going. And the question is then what happens with the so-called space of my heart? So I'm specifically trying to, quote unquote, manipulate the capacity of space in my heart, taking it into my heart exactly where I do not want it, and turning it, transforming it to white light and sending it out.
Okay.
So I'm no longer the center where everything gets stuck. It's all about, I do not want to get stuck. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else? All right. Well, let's end by listening to 3 sounds of the bell. So thank you everyone for coming. Enjoy your evening and enjoy your week.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.